If you feel vulnerable right now and easily susceptible to being affected by the mental illness discourse, then this video may not be for you. I am not a professional in the field, only an individual with an interest in the topic. Mental health is everywhere. If we talk about happiness or joy or wonder, we're still talking about mental health. Mental illness is nothing without mental health. They inevitably go together. And since today is Mental Health Awareness Day, and I'm trying to be more or less topical as much as you can be in the niche we're in, I began to wonder, how do we talk about mental health and illness with each other? And can it ever stop sounding pitiful or dramatic or just somehow uncomfortable? In this video, I'll primarily concentrate on portraying mental illness in art in order to shed some light on the topic. There is a long history of madness or mental illness being punished. One of the most well-known texts on it is Michel Foucault's Madness and Civilization, which among other things focuses on mental asylums and how keeping people there is treating them like prisoners, hiding them away from society. If we look at the present moment, however, mental illness seems to be big and somehow shameful and hidden away on the one hand, and something minor and brushed off. Oh, everyone's mentally ill these days, it doesn't matter, or oh, you're just looking for attention on the other. People expect you to find help in your own time nowadays. So mental illness is considered to be something very private. And the only acceptable way of discussing the topic seems to be through art. To go further with this, we may ask, should mental illness be hidden away in asylums to maintain some sort of order? Or should it be dramatically expressed as we see in many examples of artists? Is there a middle ground? Those going through a mental illness, and of course it obviously depends on the condition itself, seem to be either punished or celebrated. In both cases, they're somehow outside of society. Mental illness is then considered to be something outside of society, of regular life. Which brings me back to my original question, how do we talk about it out in the open? If it is so outside of society, do we have to go to the margins to discuss it? Or to talk about it evasively, that is an art? And in the long run, is that sustainable? The danger here is that it is assumed that when mental illness overcomes us, then we somehow fail at life. And we can only succeed if we use this illness to express it in a different, higher, more abstract reality, instead of infecting real life with the mental health and illness discourse. Also, there's obviously the matter of hierarchy, since some conditions look better or more appealing than others, so they're more commonly used in art as well. In order to give you an analogy to mental illness and art, let's talk about trepanation, which is a surgical intervention in which a hole is drilled or scraped into the human skull. And it used to be considered a cure for madness. In the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, it goes back to Neolithic times, even. It was believed that through this opening, the evil spirits would be released and you would be cured. Even today, trepanation exists in the circles of alternative medicine. On the internet, you can find the International Trepanation Advocacy Group, who consider trepanation to be a means of enlightenment, creativity, and enhanced consciousness. So after reading about it, it seemed like a pretty good analogy of putting your art out there into the world, even though it's pretty violent and it's obviously not the same thing. I'm not saying this is my personal view. It's not. I'm just trying to make associations. In this sense, we can interpret mental illness to be something that is toxic to us personally, but that is meant to leave us and be put out there into the world. It's as if we're intermediaries who endure mental illness for it to be transformed into art. This is stretching it, but it's an interesting metaphor. And it also fits into this illusion of having to pay for your art with mental distress. It's also interesting to see how old these ideas are, how ingrained in us, that mental illness is associated to be either dangerous and demonic or mysterious and magical. The lines between these turn blurry. The word possessed, too, is often a very extreme extension of inspired. You can be possessed by inspiration. And considering mental illness as a variation of inspiration can be dangerous, but this notion does exist, even in our subconscious. So I think it's worth acknowledging that, even if it takes a violent analogy to do it, to remember that, to keep that in mind. So why is mental illness so often associated with art? Maybe one of the reasons why so many people dealing with mental illness turn to art is because it's more acceptable to depict art through those mediums. Maybe that's why we are so drawn to it. Showing sadness or rage or anything more toxic and serious seems normal in art, whereas in real life, in a regular conversation, it is often frowned upon. This video would be too long if I focused on the entirety of the art world, so I'll mainly discuss mental illness within the area of music, and how that affects the ways in which we do or do not, or can or cannot, discuss mental health and illness. As Simon Frith put it, pop songs celebrate not the articulate, but the inarticulate, and the evaluation of pop singers depends not on words, but on sounds, on the noises around the work. Does that mean that singing about mental health is both expressing yourself and hiding the thing you want to say at the same time? There are many artists who depict mental illness in their work, but some of those I thought of primarily are Elliott Smith, Ian Curtis from Joy Division, Cornell, or more recently, Billie Eilish, though I'm not as familiar with the latter as all the other ones, but I do know she's very popular and known for singing about mental illness. And the question is, one of the questions is, do we need censorship? If we perform mental health, do we have to worry about dramatizing or glamorizing it? Let's compare some of the lyrics of those artists. For example, in Billie Eilish's Bellyache, she sings, "The way I wear my noose like a necklace." Referring to noose can be quite extreme, especially in the way she does it, the imagery she evokes. But what about Soundgarden's Pretty Noose? I don't like what you got me hanging from. It almost seems as though Billie Eilish tries to make her imagery a bit sensationalist, in a way that she's using her mental health problems as a strength, something on display, something usually considered to be pretty. And that can be dangerous sometimes, using the noose as a necklace to display in front of the world. On the other hand, Chris Cornell from Soundgarden focuses on the fact that this was not his choice. He doesn't like where he's hanging from, he doesn't like the position he's in, and he's directing the song at someone. He doesn't refer to mental illness explicitly, but it may be hidden between the lines, especially since he uses the word noose. So they both reference the noose in two different ways. Is one better, less triggering than the other? Are they both concerning, or are they good depictions of mental health, whatever good means in this context? And should we be more open, more explicit about these things? Billie Eilish's lyrics may say something about the times we live in, I think. In general, in her lyrics, there seems to be a tendency towards wanting attention. There's nothing wrong with that, even if it can be problematic. For example, in her song, Everything I Wanted, she sings, "Nobody cried, nobody even noticed. I saw them standing right there, kinda thought they might care." There's this repeated theme of no one seeing her, of wanting her problems to be acknowledged, and wearing them out like a necklace, which can be a marker of our times. If an illness is visible and extreme, one is hidden away. But if the illness is not visible, it's not treated as seriously. And in the age we live in, when everything can be put on display so easily, the desire for attention can be stronger, and the lack of it can be more daunting. And Chris Cornell, on the other hand, his lyrics are more ambiguous in general. He walks around mental illness often, he sings about it, but it's not as clear. Some of his lyrics are filled with beautiful, visceral imagery. Some lyrics are very dark and morbid, but also really straightforward. And some are very hopeful, though not over the top. He manages to put all those different shades in, while remaining honest and sort of, well, it is how it is about it. But then, given Cornell's recent death, this reality sheds a very different light on the nature of his lyrics, just because we know what happened to him. And the situation is similar with Ian Curtis. No one really cared about what he was singing about while he was alive, and people only started analyzing his lyrics after his death. Only then people focused on the epilepsy references and she's lost control, or the destructive relationships and love will tear us apart, or the sense of isolation and, well, isolation. Art imitated life, though people were only able to spot it when it was the other way around, when life began to imitate art. Obviously, this shows we're still more instinctively attuned to life than to art. So what does that say about what we pay attention to or how we look at things? Can that be a sign that mental illness depicted in art is not enough? Noticing how very subtly the lyrics are changing over time may show us our own reactions to the mental health/illness discourse, and how we have become more attuned to the singer's lyrics. And also musicians are becoming more open about the meanings of their songs, even if there is a danger of glamorizing it, without the intention to do so. But what if that causes the musician to be seen as one-dimensional? The word stigma comes from Latin, meaning mark, brand. It suggests that mental illness forever brands you, it makes you somehow different, and also that it defines you completely, becomes your brand. Is it possible to ever get rid of this? If you're an artist creating mental illness-oriented art, is there a danger of this becoming your brand? I mentioned Elliott Smith before. He has this one song, Miss Misery, where he personifies his mental illness, which I think is quite popular. And again, he considers her a woman, which might be his way of distancing himself from her. He's not claiming that this is him, but that is something outside of him, which may be a bit different from other things that are done, like calling anorexia Anna, which I personally find quite problematic sometimes. Elliott Smith once said in an interview, "Listeners only notice my music being dark, so they hear this one thing about my songs and they make that stand in for what they are. But there's humor in there sometimes. They don't make me feel worse, they make me feel better." He is trying to be a multifaceted, diverse musician, and yet he's put into that simplistic box of depression artist. And that being said, it seems as though mental illness, even though it is so complex, it makes us seem one-dimensional, both in art and in life. And that could be one of the problems we might face upon sharing our experiences. It puts us in this spot where we become or feel ourselves as caricatures of ourselves, absorbed by the essence of whatever it is the primary emotion of what we're going through. It's very easy to be marked, branded, stigmatized, whoever you are. So there is a danger of appropriating a certain mental illness. On the internet, there are many articles with titles such as "A list of songs that encapsulate depression or anxiety or something perfectly." But that's not necessarily true. It almost seems like certain songs or artists become agents of depression/anxiety/whatever it feels acceptable to talk about, since I did mention the hierarchy of mental illness, which is a thing. But of course, that doesn't mean they shouldn't express themselves. Only that in music and art, their experience almost always becomes somewhat dramatized. And we always feel like it doesn't entirely match our own because it is dramatized. And reality is almost always less dramatic than how we make it out to be or how we store it in our memories. So, can we truly communicate mental illness through art and understand each other? Music sends this false message that you can encapsulate an entire experience within one song. So obviously it will always be somewhat simplistic, but it's still important, of course. For example, what I mentioned before, the depiction of epilepsy in Joy Division's She's Lost Control. Epilepsy is not a very popular topic to sing about, I think, but when I hear She's Lost Control, or when I first heard it without knowing it was about epilepsy, I interpret it differently based on my own perception of the world, my own experiences. And that's because it is all about feeling. Feeling is universal. And that can be both comforting and frustrating, because everyone will have their own interpretations of the songs. There is some research showing that talking about mental health and illness with children decreases their chance of long-term disorders. So the topic definitely needs to be normalized. But based on what I've been discussing here, can it be normalized? It's hard to decide when to start talking about it and with whom. Can you mention mental illness anecdotally? Don't you risk offending someone or making them feel uncomfortable? But isn't it also the only way of treating it as an unavoidable and inescapable part of life? It's like buying insurance in case something happens to our house or our car. And we also need insurance in case we fall mentally ill. And how to insure that insurance? By making it a part of life, among other things, by acknowledging it. Otherwise, we may not be able to deal with it, to confront it as something that happens in the world, as something that is not outside of society, outside of life. It is life. And to come back to art, another important point, another danger, is that if you want to make a good work of art, it will be beautiful on some level. And someone may mistake the art being beautiful for a certain mental illness to be beautiful. That is a trap, even though it's not what the artists are communicating most of the time. So I would argue that I'm not sure if it's possible to talk about mental health and illness without dramatizing it a little bit, at least. Because that's what vulnerability is. And if we start sharing our deepest feelings, it will never come out as fully neutral. It will always be somehow tense. The solution is not to reach a point where talking about mental illness will become casual, but rather to get acquainted with the tension and not make it worse, not stigmatize it. Mental strain differs from physical strain in a sense that it is layered, it's not always comprehensible. It pains us on a different, more vulnerable level. There are so many places in which you can feel pain physically, and then you say, it's my knee, it's my elbow, it's my right foot. But with mental health, what do we have? We can say, oh, it's my heart, but that's not enough. There are as many shades of mental health as there are of physical health, but they're not defined because they are too individual. So we resort to art, to imagery, to metaphor, and often, unintentionally, to some sort of glamorization. I guess what I'm trying to say is, talking about mental health might feel consistently uncomfortable, and we should acknowledge that. It may feel dramatic and over the top for a long, long time, and not forever. And that's why it's so important that we keep doing it, because this is a very strange space. Those are literally the very depths of ourselves. And when we're in that depth, in that well, our words echo and transform, and we see things from different perspectives. And that is uncomfortable. And if we face that, maybe we'll accept it and do it anyway. I'd love to hear what you think of this very, very extensive topic. I obviously only scratched the surface, but if you enjoyed the video, then consider liking and sharing and subscribing to my channel. As always, thank you for your time.